Every healthcare worker under the NICE guidelines has a responsibility for the spiritual care of our patients, but many of us don't know what it is or how we do it. What does spirituality mean? It's worth having a think about that for yourself. But for me, I think it's a universal thing that all of us have an inner being, somewhere that's very private and very much our own place. It's the place where we find meaning, it's the place where we find hope, it's the place where we find joy, and it's the place where we make sense of the world. And then there's the question about organised religion. And in our country, in our culture, we're very reticent to ask that, but it's a very important one, because often people won't tell you unless you ask them. So you just say, I wonder if you're involved in any kind of organised religion, or you sign up for a particular framework, for example, Christianity, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, Sikh. Those are the ones we most often come across in the Oxfordshire locality, but there are many others. But there's another form of spirituality that we mustn't ever forget, and those are people who do not recognise any kind of deity. And their position is just as valid as the position of someone like myself who does recognise a deity, but they similarly, they need spiritual care. Our job as healthcare workers is to receive that without judgment.
So when Muslim patients are coming towards the end of life, the really important thing is they want to have their loved ones around them. Number two is to be able to recite the Quran, so the relative reciting the Quran next to at their bedside. The third is that they will want to pray, offer their own prayer. And there are instances when they can't wash with water, and so as an alternative we have what's called tayammum, which is pure earth, which they touch and wipe over their face and then over the arms, and they're ready then to pray. Also talk about after death. So for Muslim families, it's really important that they're able to bury their deceased, their loved ones, as soon as possible, either the same day or the next day. And so we need to be able to discuss what would happen practically in terms of the issuing of the medical certificate for the cause of death, for the release of the body from the trust, so that the funeral directors can take the deceased to the local mosque and then prepare for burial and funeral.
In this country, we can do emergency marriage. Many people live together, and they live together for a very long time. At the point where they suddenly realise that they're dying and they haven't done it, this can become a very, very big issue. And we have had many, many weddings here in Soho House and in the Churchill and in the JR. It is an amazing thing. The key thing is, all these subjects, don't be frightened to talk about them.
Be brave. As people approach the end of life, it's really important to have those very sensitive conversations. In each family, every patient, they will be different. Have the patient at the centre of our care and attention.
We're doing it for the benefit of the patient and for the long-term benefit of the bereaved. All the evidence shows that it's not so much the fact that someone's died that people remember, it's how they died and how they were cared for.
My role was not so much to do things with patients in the hospice, having care and their families, as seeing people afterwards. So in a way I got a retrospective feel of how people felt about the last year.
Did you get any sense of whether it had an impact on people's experience, whether they'd had the opportunity to discuss death before their loved one had died?
Yes, massively.
Okay.
If the person dying was aware they were dying, were able to say what they wanted, what their needs were, maybe last wishes and so on, and the family or people close to them could hear it and respond, it was fine. But so often there was a mismatch. Maybe the patient or the family might think that the patient didn't really want to know they were dying and they didn't want to talk about it, etc.
Do you think that could have been resolved with skillful communications and facilitation of these conversations?
Definitely.
Yeah.
The positive side of of actually having those conversations means that people talk about the fact that they knew exactly what their loved one wanted and they were able to carry out their wishes. So one being at home to die, or which isn't always possible, but also the wishes around the funeral, really key in enabling somebody to cope after somebody dies. The other areas that it impacts not having that conversation is the paperwork, really having their affairs sort of organised. People really struggle with having to cope with all of that when their loved one hasn't organised it. Whereas if that has been organised, then the bereaved relative knows exactly what they need to do.
If you were to have one message that you would like people to have about advanced care planning, what would it be?
It would be, hopefully, that the patient and those closest to him or her are able to talk to a health professional to enable them to talk about what they want and don't want, including funeral arrangements.
Yes.
Because so often they're overlooked.
Yes.
I would say to healthcare professionals who are caring for people in the last phase of their life, and that could be days, weeks or months, is to be brave and have these conversations with the person who's dying. In talking to families as well, being open and honest. Ask them the question, have you thought about planning for your dying and your death? What are your wishes? Is there any unfinished business that you want to look at?